Imagine being a successful entrepreneur, a trailblazer in your field, and then discovering a purpose so powerful that it redefines your entire life. That's exactly what happened to Lydia, a wealthy merchant dealing in the finest purple cloth, a symbol of prestige and royalty. But Lydia wasn't just known for her business acumen, she was also a woman of deep faith. One day, by a quiet riverside, her life took a divine turn. There, she met Paul, and through a simple conversation, her heart was opened by God Himself. Lydia didn't just listen, she acted. She used her wealth and influence to serve the kingdom, transforming her home into a center for the early church. How did Lydia manage to balance her thriving business with her newfound kingdom purpose? The answer lies in her unwavering commitment to God's call. Stick around, and let's uncover her incredible story, a story that's as relevant for us today as it was 2,000 years ago. The story is found in the book of Acts 16 verses 14 to 40. Lydia was no ordinary woman. She was a merchant of purple cloth, a highly coveted fabric that only the wealthiest could afford. Based in Philippi but originally from Thyatira, Lydia had built a reputation as a savvy businesswoman. She wasn't just selling cloth, she was selling prestige. Kings, nobles, and influential figures sought her out for her goods. Yet, despite her success, Lydia carried a quiet hunger, something that wealth and accomplishments couldn't satisfy. One Sabbath morning, Lydia felt drawn to a gathering outside the city gates, near the river. This wasn't a usual business meeting or a deal to negotiate. It was a gathering of women, worshipping and praying to the God of Israel. Lydia, though a Gentile, was a worshipper of God, someone who sought the truth beyond the idols of her culture. As she listened that day, a man named Paul began to speak. His words weren't polished sales pitches or lofty rhetoric. Instead, they carried a power Lydia had never encountered. Paul spoke of Jesus, a man who died on a cross yet rose again, offering forgiveness and a relationship with the one true God. And then it happened, a moment Lydia would never forget. It wasn't Paul's persuasive words that convinced her, it was as if a door within her heart suddenly swung wide open. Acts 16 verse 14 puts it this way, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. In that instant, Lydia's hunger was satisfied. She knew this was the truth she had been searching for. But Lydia didn't stop at belief. True to her decisive and action-oriented nature, she took the next step, baptism. Along with her household, Lydia publicly declared her faith in Christ. This wasn't just a private moment of devotion, it was a bold, countercultural act in a city steeped in Roman traditions. Yet Lydia's transformation didn't stop there. Her faith immediately intertwined with her business. She opened her home to Paul and his companions, offering not just hospitality but a base for their missionary work. Her home became a hub for the fledgling church in Philippi, a place where believers could gather, pray, and grow. Balancing her role as a merchant and a kingdom builder wasn't easy, but Lydia saw her business as part of her ministry. Her wealth wasn't a source of pride, it was a tool for God's purposes. She likely continued to trade her exquisite purple cloth, not for personal gain alone, but to fund the work of the gospel. Every deal she closed, every piece of cloth she sold, carried a deeper purpose. Lydia's story shows us that business and faith aren't separate paths. She didn't have to choose between being successful and serving God, she did both, and she did them well. For Lydia, success wasn't defined by the bottom line, it was measured by her obedience to God's call. Her legacy still speaks to us today. How are you using your skills, resources, and opportunities for something bigger than yourself? Lydia reminds us that God can use every part of our lives, our careers, our homes, even our daily routines, to impact His kingdom. So, what's in your hand today? Whether it's a business, a talent, or a simple willingness to serve, Lydia's life challenges us to offer it all to God. Who knows what He might do through you? Lydia's story begins in a complex cultural setting. She was a Gentile, living in a Roman colony, yet she worshipped the God of Israel. This devotion shows her willingness to seek truth beyond the boundaries of her upbringing and societal norms. When Paul preached the gospel, Lydia's heart was opened, and she embraced Jesus as her Savior. This teaches us that faith is not confined by cultural or social barriers. Lydia's pursuit of God led her to the truth, even though she came from a background steeped in idolatry. She wasn't limited by her status as a wealthy businesswoman or her identity as a Gentile. Instead, her heart remained open to the leading of God. In our lives, cultural norms and societal pressures can sometimes make faith seem irrelevant or impractical. Lydia's story reminds us that the gospel transcends these limitations. It speaks to every heart, no matter the background, profession, or social standing. Furthermore, Lydia's openness serves as a challenge for us. Are we willing to step beyond the boundaries of our comfort zones to pursue truth? Do we allow God to speak to us, even when it disrupts our preconceived ideas or challenges our status quo? Faith is not about fitting into a mold, it's about being open to God's transformative power. Lydia shows us that when we seek God wholeheartedly, He meets us where we are and leads us into His purposes, no matter our starting point. Her story invites us to live boldly, crossing barriers and embracing the fullness of what God has for us. Lydia was a successful merchant, trading in purple cloth, a symbol of luxury and wealth. Her business acumen made her influential, yet her encounter with God showed her that true success goes beyond financial achievements. Instead of hoarding her wealth or focusing solely on her career, Lydia aligned her success with kingdom purpose. She used her resources to serve God, opening her home to Paul and his companions. Her house became the first meeting place for the church in Philippi, a sanctuary where the gospel could grow. Lydia didn't separate her faith from her work. Instead, she saw her business as a platform for ministry. This teaches us that success is not just about personal gain, but about how we use our influence and resources for God's glory. Too often, we compartmentalize our lives, treating faith as something separate from our careers. Lydia reminds us that our work, skills, and achievements can be tools in God's hands. True success isn't measured by the size of our bank accounts or the prestige of our titles. It's measured by our obedience to God's call and how we leverage what we have for His kingdom. Like Lydia, we can use our homes, businesses, and resources to create spaces where people can encounter God. Reflect on your life. How are you using your success to serve God? Are you aligning your goals with His purposes? Lydia's story challenges us to redefine success, not as something to possess, but as something to steward. When we do, our lives become testimonies of God's grace and provision. One of the most striking moments in Lydia's story is found in Acts 16 verse 14. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. This simple yet profound statement highlights the transformative power of an open heart. Lydia didn't come to faith through logic or persuasion alone. God prepared her heart to receive the gospel. This teaches us an important truth. Faith begins with God's initiative. He reaches out to us, softens our hearts, and enables us to respond to His call. Lydia's openness made her a vessel for God's work, and her life was forever changed. For us, this underscores the importance of maintaining a soft, receptive heart. It's easy to become hardened by life's challenges, doubts, or even complacency. But when we keep our hearts open to God, we position ourselves to hear His voice and experience His transformative power. An open heart also requires humility. Lydia was a successful and independent woman, yet she was humble enough to recognize her need for God. This humility allowed her to not only hear the gospel, but to act on it immediately. Take a moment to reflect. Is your heart open to God's leading? Are you willing to let Him work in ways that may challenge or change you? Lydia's story reminds us that transformation begins when we let God in, and He uses an open heart to accomplish His divine purposes. Lydia's first act after her conversion was an invitation. She urged Paul and his companions to stay at her home, saying, "If you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house." Acts 16 verse 15. Her home became a sanctuary for the early church, a place where believers could gather and grow. Hospitality was more than an act of kindness for Lydia, it was a ministry. She saw her home as a resource for God's work, and her hospitality helped establish the first church in Europe. This teaches us that ministry doesn't always happen on a stage or in formal settings. Often, it happens in the ordinary spaces of our lives. Hospitality is a powerful way to serve God. It creates an environment of welcome and care, where people can experience God's love in tangible ways. Like Lydia, we don't need to have perfect homes or abundant resources to practice hospitality. What matters is a willingness to open our hearts and lives to others. In a world that often values independence and privacy, Lydia's example challenges us to see hospitality as a kingdom tool. How can you use your home, time, or resources to bless others? Who might God be calling you to welcome into your life? Lydia's story reminds us that small acts of hospitality can have eternal impact. By opening her home, she became a vital part of the gospel's spread. Her example encourages us to see every interaction and space as an opportunity to reflect God's love. Lydia wasn't a prophet, preacher, or public figure. She was a businesswoman, living her everyday life when God called her. Her story shows us that God's call often comes in the ordinary, not the spectacular. God met Lydia by a river, during what seemed like a routine gathering. Yet that moment changed her life forever. She didn't have to leave her business or adopt a new identity to serve God. Instead, He used her as she was, a merchant with resources, influence, and a willing heart. This teaches us that God calls us where we are. We don't need to wait for extraordinary circumstances to serve Him. Whether we're in an office, a classroom, or at home, God can use our everyday lives for His glory. The key is to remain faithful and attentive, like Lydia. Lydia's story also challenges us to find purpose in the ordinary. Are you viewing your daily work, interactions, and routines as opportunities for ministry? God doesn't just call pastors or missionaries, He calls teachers, parents, entrepreneurs, and everyone in between. Reflect on your life. Where might God be calling you to make an impact? Lydia's willingness to respond to God's call in the midst of her ordinary life reminds us that every moment is an opportunity to serve Him. When we embrace this perspective, even the mundane becomes meaningful, and our lives become testimonies of God's grace. Lydia's story is a powerful reminder that God can use anyone, anywhere, for His divine purposes. She wasn't a preacher or prophet, she was a businesswoman with a heart open to God. From the riverside prayer meeting to her home-turn church, Lydia balanced her success with her kingdom purpose, showing us that faith and work are not separate but intertwined. Her life challenges us to ask, how can we use our skills, resources, and influence to serve God? Like Lydia, we don't have to abandon our everyday lives to make an eternal impact. We simply need to open our hearts to God's call and say yes to His purpose for us. At Scriptures in Pictures TV, we believe stories like Lydia's inspire us to see our lives as part of God's bigger story. Whether you're running a business, managing a household, or pursuing your career, remember, your faith can shine through everything you do. Thank you for watching this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Scriptures in Pictures TV for more captivating and inspiring Bible stories brought to life. Let Lydia's story remind you that God's purpose can transform your ordinary into extraordinary. Until next time, keep living with faith and purpose.